Okay. Chapter 6 The Shoemaker. Good day, said Monsieur Defarge, looking down at the white head that bent low over the shoemaking. It was raised for a moment, and a very faint voice responded to the salutation as if it were at a distance. Good day. You are still hard at work, I see. After a long silence, the head was lifted for another moment, and the voice replied, Yes, I am working. This time a pair of haggard eyes had looked at the questioner before the face had dropped again. The faintness of the voice was pitiable and dreadful. It was not the faintness of physical weakness, though confinement and hard fare no doubt had their part in it. Its deplorable peculiarity was that it was the faintness of solitude and disuse. It was like the last feeble echo of a sound made long and long ago. So entirely had it lost the life and resonance of the human voice that it affected the senses like a once beautiful color faded away into a poor weak stain. So sunken and suppressed it was that it was like a voice underground. So expressive it was of a hopeless and lost creature that a famished traveler, wearied out by lonely wandering in a wilderness, would have remembered home and friends in such a tone before lying down to die. So very you know what, you should pause it, reread that paragraph. Dickens isn't very descriptive with his visuals. He's very descriptive with even sound, the way that the shoemaker's voice was like. You can pause the video, you can reread it. It's a very beautiful writing. It captures the voice and the speaker and the emotion behind it very, very well. Some minutes of silent work had passed, and the haggard eyes had looked up again, not with any interest or curiosity, but with a dull mechanical perception beforehand that the spot where the only visitor they were aware of had stood was not yet empty. I want, said Defarge, who had not removed his gaze from the shoemaker, to let in a little more light here. You can bear a little more? The shoemaker stopped his work, looked with a vacant air of listening at the floor on one side of him, then similarly at the floor on the other side of him, then upward at the speaker. What did you say? You can bear a little more light? I must bear it if you let it in, laying the palest shadow of a stress upon the second word. Okay? So Defarge, remember when Defarge kept making sounds outside of the door? He couldn't just barge in. It's because our shoemaker is so traumatized already that even to let in a little more light, he has to ask him, like, is it okay if I let in a little more light? So he has to be very sensitive to this man who's been very traumatized already. So he asks him these questions nga. That's why he made noises outside the door so he wouldn't be shocked. He wouldn't be triggered if they just barge in. And he also said nga, can I let in the light? And then his reply is very telling, said of the shoemaker nga, I must bear it if you let it in. Okay, so Defarge is like, can you bear a little more light? And he says, if you want to let in more light, I don't have a choice. I must bear it. The opened half door was opened a little further and secured at that angle for the time. A broad ray of light fell into the garret and showed the workman with an unfinished shoe upon his lap, pausing in his labor. His few common tools and various scraps of leather were at his feet and on his bench. He had a white beard raggedly cut, but not very long, a hollow face and exceedingly bright eyes. The hollowness and thinness of his face would have caused them to look large under his yet dark eyebrows and his confused white hair, though they had been really otherwise. But they were naturally large and looked unnaturally so. His yellow rags of shirt lay open at the throat and showed his body to be withered and worn. He and his old canvas frock and his loose stockings and all his poor tatters of clothes had, in a long seclusion from direct light and air, faded down to such a dull uniformity of parchment yellow that it would have been hard to say which was which. So this is our shoemaker. It's Jeremy Irons. He's an amazing actor, and his voice is very nice. He does a lot of Shakespeare stuff. He had put up a hand between his eyes and the light, and the very bones of it seemed transparent. So he sat with a steadfastly vacant gaze, pausing in his work. He never looked at the figure before him without first looking down on the side of himself, then on that, as if he had lost the habit of associating place with a sound. He never spoke without first wondering in this manner and forgetting to speak. Okay? So whenever someone talks to him, whenever Defarge talks to him, it's like he doesn't even know where it's coming from. He's kind of like he kind of like looks around before he looks at the speaker. So every time Defarge says like, "Can I let in more light?" Muna siya mo looks around and then he looks at the one speaking. It's like he's forgotten na kuno how place and sound connect. "Are you going to finish that pair of shoes today?" asked Defarge, motioning to Mr. Lorry to come forward. "What did you say? Do you mean to finish that pair of shoes today?" "I can't say that I mean to. I suppose so. I don't know." But the question reminded him of his work and he bent over it again. Mr. Lorry came silently forward, leaving the daughter by the door. When he had stood for a minute or two by the side of Defarge, the shoemaker looked up. He showed no surprise at seeing another figure, but the unsteady fingers of one of his hands strayed to his lips as he looked at it. His lips and his nails were of the same pale lead color. And then the hand dropped to his work, and he once more bent over the shoe. The look and the action had occupied but an instant. "You have a visitor, you see," said Monsieur Defarge. "What did you say?" "Here is a visitor." The shoemaker looked up as before, but without removing a hand from his work. "Come," said Defarge, "here's Monsieur who knows a well-made shoe when he sees one. Show him that shoe you are working at. Take it, Monsieur." Mr. Lorry took it in his hand. "Tell Monsieur what kind of shoe it is, and the maker's name." There was a longer pause than usual before the shoemaker replied, "I forgot what it was you asked me. What did you say?" "I said, couldn't you describe the kind of shoe for Monsieur's information?" "It is a lady's shoe. It is a young lady's walking shoe. It is in the present mode. I never saw the mode. I have had a pattern in my hand." He glanced at the shoe with some little passing touch of pride. "And the maker's name?" said Defarge. Now that he had no work to hold, he laid the knuckles of the right hand in the hollow of the left, and the knuckles of the left hand in the hollow of the right, and then passed a hand across his bearded chin, and so on in regular changes, without a moment's intermission. The task of recalling him from the vacancy into which he always sank when he had spoken was like recalling some very weak person from a swoon, or endeavoring in the hope of some disclosure to stay the spirit of a fast-dying man. Okay, so he talked about the shoe, and when he's not working on the shoe, he keeps moving his hand around. It's like he can't stop moving his hand. He needs something to work on with his hands. Yun. And then Defarge asked him for his name also. "Did you ask me for my name?" "Assuredly I did. 105 North Tower." So that's the name he gives to Defarge. Defarge's like, "What's your name?" 105 North Tower. "Is that all?" 105 North Tower. With a weary sound, it was not a sigh nor a groan, he bent to work again until the silence was again broken. "You are not a shoemaker by trade?" said Mr. Lorry, looking steadfastly at him. His haggard eyes turned to Defarge as if he would have transferred the question to him. But as no help came from that quarter, they turned back on the questioner when they had sought the ground. "I am not a shoemaker by trade. No, I was not a shoemaker by trade. I learned it here. I taught myself. I asked leave to." He lapsed away even for minutes, ringing those measured changes on his hands the whole time. His eyes came slowly back at last to the face from which they had wandered when they rested on it. He started and resumed in the manner of a sleeper that moment awake, reverting to a subject of last night. "I asked leave to teach myself, and I got it with much difficulty after a long while, and I have made shoes ever since." As he held out his hand for the shoe that had been taken from him, Mr. Lorry said, still looking steadfastly in his face, "Monsieur Manette, do you remember nothing of me?" The shoe dropped to the ground, and he sat looking fixedly at the questioner. Okay, so I want you to read, starting from Monsieur Manette. Mr. Lorry laid his hand. I want you to read all the way to hold on. Read After hush. Hush, let us draw further back. Hush. So read from Monsieur Manette. Mr. Laurie laid his hand all the way to let us draw further back. Hush. Okay? Pause, read, and then play again. Okay? Are we back? You read that? So she, which is obviously Lucy, she's the only girl in the room, she had moved from the wall of the garret very near to the bench on which he sat. There was something awful in his unconsciousness of the figure that could have put out its hand and touched him as he stooped over his labor. Not a word was spoken, not a sound was made. She stood like a spirit beside him, and he bent over his work. It happened at length that he had occasion to change the instrument on his hand for his shoemaker's knife. It lay on that side of him, which was not the side on which he stood. He had taken it up and was stooping to work again when his eyes caught the skirt of her dress. He raised them and saw her face. The two spectators started forward, but she stayed them with a motion of her hand. She had no fear of his striking at her with a knife, though they had. Okay, so the shoemaker was working. He got a knife, and then he looked up at Lucy, and then Defarge and Laurie like rushed forward to pull her back because they were scared that he would get triggered and like stab her or something. But Lucy kind of stopped them. Like she put her hand up and was like, no, don't interfere. She wasn't scared of him. He stared at her with a fearful look, and after a while his lips began to form some words. Though no sound proceeded from them, by degrees, in the process of his quick and labored breathing, he was heard to say, "What is this?" With the tears streaming down her face, she put her two hands to her lips and kissed them to him, then clasped them on her breast as if she laid his ruined head there. "You are not the Gowler's daughter?" She sighed. "No." "Who are you?" Not yet trusting the tones of her voice, she sat down on the bench beside him. He recoiled, but she laid her hand upon his arm. A strange thrill struck him when she did so, and visibly passed over his frame. He laid the knife down softly as he sat staring at her. Her golden hair, which she wore in long curls, had been hurriedly pushed aside and fell down over her neck. Advancing his hand by little and little, he took it up and looked at it. In the midst of the action, he went astray and with another deep sigh, fell to work at his shoemaking. But not for long. Releasing his arm, she laid her hand upon his shoulder. After looking doubtfully at it 2 or 3 times, as if to be sure that it was really there, he laid down his work, put his hand to his neck, and took off a blackened string with a scrap of folded rag attached to it. He opened this carefully on his knee, and it contained a very little quantity of hair, not more than 1 or 2 long golden hairs, which he had in some old day wound off upon his finger. He took her hair into his hand again and looked closely at it. "It is the same. How can it be? When was it? How was it?" Okay, so Lucy kind of sits beside him, and then he kind of continues working. But then he kind of looks at her hair, and then he takes out a black thread where a rag is, guys, and in it, there are a few strands of blonde hair. So he's like, "It's the same as your hair. How is this possible?" As a concentrating expression returned to his forehead, he seemed to become conscious that it was in hers too. He turned her full to the light and looked at her. She had laid her head upon my shoulder that night when I was summoned out. She had a fear of my going, though I had none. And when I was brought to the North Tower, they found these upon my sleeve. "You will leave me then. They can never help me to escape in the body, though they may in the spirit." Those were the words I said. I remember them very well. He formed this speech with his lips many times before he could utter it. But when he did find spoken words for it, they came to him coherently, though slowly. "How was this? Was it you?" Once more the 2 spectators started as he turned upon her with a frightful suddenness. But she sat perfectly still in his grasp and only said in a low voice, "I entreat you, good gentlemen, do not come near us, do not speak, do not move." Okay, so the shoemaker is like, "Why is your hair the same as the hair that was on my shoulder from the woman who hugged me before I was arrested?" Okay, so Murag, he was like, why is it the same? And then again, Defarge and Laurie were like rushed forward because they were scared he was gonna attack her. But then Lucy again is like, "Relax now, don't step closer." His hands Hark, he exclaimed, whose voice was that? His hands released her as he uttered this cry and went up to his white hair, which they tore in a frenzy. It died out, as everything but his shoemaking did die out of him. And he refolded his little packet and tried to secure it in his breast. But he still looked at her and gloomily shook his head. No, no, no. You are too young, too blooming. It can't be. Okay, so guys, who do you think, why is he confused? Who does he think Lucy is? It's the same, he has the same hair. It's the same blonde hair. And then he was like, she hugged me before I went out and never came back. So who do you think is he talking about? Who do you think? Sophia, who do you think? Who else did I call yet? Malaya, who do you think? It's the mother of Lucy. Okay, he's confused because he's like, how, you are too young to be her. See what the prisoner is. These are not the hands she knew. This is not the face she knew. This is not a voice she ever heard. No, no, she was and he was before the slow years of the North Tower ages ago. What is your name, my gentle angel? Hailing his softened tone and manner, his daughter fell upon her knees before him, with her appealing hands upon his breast. O sir, at another time you shall know my name, and who my mother was, and who my father, and how I never knew their hard, hard history. But I cannot tell you at this time, and I cannot tell you here. All that I may tell you here and now is that I prayed to you to touch me and to bless me. Kiss me, oh my dear, my dear. His cold white head mingled with her radiant hair, which warmed and lighted it, as though it were the light of freedom shining on him. If you hear in my voice, I don't know that it is so, but I hope it is. If you hear in my voice any resemblance to a voice that once was sweet music in your ears, weep for it, weep for it. If you touch in touching my hair anything that recalls a beloved head that lay in your breast when you were young and free, weep for it, weep for it. If when I hint to you of a home there is before us, where I will be true to you with all my duty and with all my faithful service, I bring back the remembrance of a home long desolate, while your poor heart pined away. Weep for it, weep for it. She held him closer around the neck and rocked him on her breast like a child. If, when I tell you, dearest dear, that your agony is over, and that I have come here to take you from it, and that we go to England to be at peace and at rest, I cause you to think of your useful life laid waste, and of our native France so wicked to you. Weep for it, weep for it. And if when I shall tell you of my name and of my father who is living and of my mother who is dead, you learn that I have to kneel to my honored father and implore his pardon for having never for his sake striven all day and lain awake and wept all night because the love of my poor mother hid his torture from me. Weep for it, weep for it. Weep for her then and for me. Good gentlemen, thank God. I feel his sacred tears upon my face and his sobs strike against my heart. Oh, see, thank God for us, thank God. He had sunk in her arms with his face dropped on her breast, a sight so touching, yet so terrible in the tremendous wrong and suffered which had gone before, that the two beholders covered their faces. Okay? So Lucy was so scared by Agad, diba? Before she entered the room, she was terrified, good. And then she saw him, and what is she completely taken over with? What is her emotional response after seeing her father, who she thought was dead? Okay, think about that. Answer it in your heads, okay? I'll give you a minute. Right? What is it? It's really good love, guys. It's love, it's sorrow. She's not scared anymore. She started the chapter off so afraid. But then right now she's good, like, I will nurse you back. I apologize nga I didn't even consider you might have been alive. So it's a good daughter good written in these pages. When the quiet of the and then it was so moving kuno nga Defarge and Mr. Laurie were like covering their faces. Kaya they were very moved by Lucy. When the quiet of the garret had been long undisturbed, and his heaving breast and shaken form had long yielded to the claim that must follow all storms, emblem to humanity of the rest and silence into which the storm called life must hush at last, they came forward to raise the father and daughter from the ground. He had gradually drooped to the floor and lay there in a lethargy worn out. She had nestled down with him that his head might lie upon her arm, and her hair drooping over him curtained him from the light. If without disturbing him, she said, raising her hand to Mr. Lorry as he stooped over them, after repeated blowings of his nose. So Mr. Lorry kept like, blowing his nose because he was crying. All could be arranged for our leaving Paris at once, so that from the very door he could be taken away. But consider, is he fit for the journey? Asked Mr. Lorry. More fit for that, I think, than to remain in the city so dreadful to him. It is true, said Defarge, who was kneeling to look on and hear. More than that, Monsieur Manette is, for all reasons, best out of France. Say, shall I hire a carriage and post horses? That's business, said Mr. Lorry, resuming on the shortest notice his methodical manners. And if business is to be done, I had better do it. Okay? The thing about Mr. Lorry, good guys, I love him so much because he keeps saying, I'm a businessman, I'm business, I'm all business, but he gets very emotional. And this will continue on for the whole story, good man. He's always good like, no, I'm business, I'm professional, but he always gets emotionally involved. I want you to read starting from Then Be So Kind, urged Miss Manette. I want you to read all the way to adieu from Defarge. Adieu from Defarge. So once it says adieu from Defarge, you continue playing the video and we'll read the last few paragraphs of the chapter together. Okay? So starting from Then Be So Kind, urged Manette, to adieu from Defarge. Okay? Pause the video, read, and then play again. And so, under a short grove of feebler and feebler over-swinging lamps, out under the great grove of stars. So basically, what happened was Defarge helped them kind of leave Paris, leave France, okay? Where he got their papers ready, and he said they should leave France good. He's not gonna be safe in France. And Lucy's like, I want him out of Paris. I want him out of the city that is so dreadful to him. Beneath that arc of unmoved and eternal light, some so remote from this little earth that the learned tell us it is doubtful whether the race have even yet discovered it as a point in space where anything is suffered or done. The shadows of the night were broad and black. All through the cold and restless interval until dawn, they once more whispered in the ears of Mr. Jarvis Lorry, sitting opposite the buried man who had been dug out, and wondering what subtle powers were forever lost to him, and what were capable of restoration. The old inquiry, I hope you care to be recalled to life, and the old answer, I can't say. Okay? So, chapter 6 ends, and this actually ends book 1, Recalled to Life. Okay? So it ends, guys, with Mr. Lorry again in a carriage. This time, the shoemaker, Dr. Manette, is with them. He's with Lucy also, and they're leaving France, and he's kind of brings up the Night Shadows, which is the title of chapter 3, right? The Night Shadows, and it repeats this dream conversation. I hope you care to live. I can't say. Okay, so I hope you care to be recalled to life, and the old answer, I can't say, and that ends book 1, Recalled to Life. Okay, so we're gonna do one more chapter 5 years later. Okay, so play the last video lang. All right, so we're already here. Book the second, The Golden Thread, chapter 1, 5 years later. So 5 years after this whole drama with the doctor.